The Boy Who Had an Elephant for a Pet is, and Other Fables, is a book written by a guy who did psychotherapy with other people, has done it for like 25 years, and tried to learn. My clients have been my teachers, and I've tried to learn to understand what they were trying to develop wisdom about myself. I never had a client that didn't have a problem I also had. And I think if you're a teacher at heart, like I am, you learn best what you struggle to teach. And the same is true in counseling and psychotherapy. And it's really been my clients who opened the eyes of my heart to the human experience. It's been easy for me to know about the other world, the spirit world, the shadow world, once I quit turning my back on it. What was hard for me is the journey of the heart. Very hard. I probably never would have been able to make it at all if I hadn't gotten into the business of counseling and psychotherapy. If I hadn't learned to love people who were struggling to understand terrible problems and make sense out of things. So what I began to do is I began to write these little squibs or pieces that were about some feature of my heart or my character that I'd also seen in the lives of other people. And how it turned out, what happened, what it meant. I tried to look all the way to the bottom of my own heart and tell the absolute spiritual truth about some choice or some weakness or some way to grow or learn in a way that made it accessible to other people. So it's a very searching book in the sense that it's really about the absolute spiritual truth inside me, the best I can hear it. And what makes it a spiritual autobiography is I don't care about the facts of my waking state life. They don't mean a thing to me. They're just a backdrop for my spiritual growth. So that's the biography or the autobiography that deserves to be written by everybody. Only most of us won't do it until our last moments here, you know. We won't even see it. So when I knew I had to write, I decided that the first thing I should write is the book about myself, but in a way that revealed what I had learned so that it was accessible to everybody if I could find a way to do it. And so that's where it came from. When I was invited to read from my work tonight, I was excited about the idea of getting the chance to share with people what I thought I had learned enough to want to say something about publicly. And when I got an invitation to come here, it seemed to be obvious that I should do it, and easy. It just seemed real clear to me. It was only after I made the commitment to come and read here on the 15th of October that I found out how many people that are in my own private Hall of Fame are represented in this room. And that, for instance, the portrait of John Neihart's on the wall over there, and there's a bust of him there, and there's a picture of him here. And it turns out that John Neihart's one of my heroes. It's somebody that I'll talk about in a minute. And I have to tell you the truth that when Vicki told me that, about this place and about who's remembered here, I wanted to back out. I was afraid to come. And in a sense, I guess you could say I still am. But nevertheless, like is so often the case in life, as Harry Overstreet used to say, nevertheless, we go on. You know, sometimes we go on. But I want you to know that it's a special experience for me. I've read material that I've written before to lots of people. I've had that experience, not 1,000 times, but many times, and I've spoken in public before, too. But I never felt that I was standing in the presence of somebody like John Neihart or Willa Cather while I was doing it, or Mary Sandoz, or Black Elk. The first thing I want to share from you is not from the first edition of The Boy Who Had an Elephant for a Pet and Other Fables, but it is from the version of it that's going to be the international edition, at least the first one. My book was nominated to an agent in Korea. Believe it or not, Imprima Korea is the name of the agency, for translation into Korean. And they asked me to submit a copy of it and to tell them what I thought about it and whether I'd be willing to enter into discussions about it being published in Korean, and I said I would. And I realized that there were things that I had to say in order to make some important things at least partly clear to people in Korea that you just could not take for granted that they would have any way to know. It seemed to me like there are some things you just could not assume that even a well-intended person would know. I did not think that they would know that the Flatwater River, for instance, that I refer to in my book is the Platte River, or that the Running Water River is the Niobrara River. I didn't see how they could have any way to know that. And so when I wrote back to them and said I'd be happy to have my book translated into Korean, I also said what I'd like very much to have you do is to be patient with me until I prepare some material that really has to be in that book for anybody who's not an American. Just a minimum, you know. And I also said there are some things in the book that I'd like to correct or repair. It could be better in some ways. It has some typographical mistakes, which I think are not very important. It has some punctuation style mistakes, which I think distract people, but I don't think they take away its meaning. But I wanted the chance to do that. In the course of trying to respond to that issue, and also to Vicky's question, because she asked me, where have you lived in Nebraska? How long have you lived in Nebraska? What does it mean to you to live here, and so on? I thought I should write this. And it's going to be in the new edition of the book. Some years ago, I was far from Nebraska, in a land that I have elsewhere called the land beyond the Chocolate Mountains. The Chocolate Mountains stretch across the eastern frontier of California near the Arizona border. And if they were 1,000 miles tall when the sun rose in the morning, the shadow of the Chocolate Mountains would fall across all of Southern California, a place where I lived and worked for a couple of years, and which I found as troubled and desolate and temporary as any place I've ever been in my life. To me, the land beyond the Chocolate Mountains, there really are mountains. They call them the Chocolate Mountains because the Mexicans named them. But it is the land beyond the Chocolate Mountains because it's Candyland. So I wrote about it some when I lived there and after I left. In any case, I was there in the land beyond the Chocolate Mountains, sitting with a friend. I had just come through a time of very terrible pain, and I was struggling to see a way to find the strength and purpose it would take to rebuild my life and to rebuild my desire to live at all. I remember Kipling saying, if you can watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. That's exactly how I felt, what I was trying to do. What are you going to do now? My friend asked me. I don't know yet, I said, and it was the honest truth. Well, where will you go? She said. And suddenly there were tears in my eyes. And I said to her, there is a boy that lives inside of me, and in his childlike way, he still believes that there is no sight in the world so beautiful as the valley of the Elkhorn River. And he wants to go home. Until I said that on that day, I did not realize that I would have to go home to rebuild my life. And on that day, I knew I would, and I also knew where my home was in a way I had not known for 15 years. Hetty Marie Andrews is a great artist, and she did a series of very striking paintings that she called Those Beautiful Nebraska Skies. She and I always agreed that here in the land of the Flatwater River, the skies are our mountains. Not long ago, I was interviewed for a job at a wonderful university in Cairo, Egypt. Egypt has been called the cradle of civilization. I have an old tie and a very deep tie to Akhenaten, a pharaoh. And so I thought that I should see if I really ought to go to Egypt. It seemed to me to be a natural enough question to ask. After all, it was a job opportunity. But when I spoke of this in a spiritually honest and searching way to a friend of mine, whose own wisdom is very deep and whose guidance is very strong and clear, she asked me, "Do you know that you have a spiritual teacher beside you?" "Yes," I said. And I was embarrassed and shy because I've all my life been someone so blessed and also someone who could find no way to understand what he had ever done to deserve any such special guidance. And to be honest with you, I'm also embarrassed by the touch of grace in my life because I feel that I have done too little to honor it in my writing, my teaching, or my counseling. She said to me, "This is the land where your spirit teacher is at home. Have you thought seriously about what it would mean to you if you were to leave it?" The answer, of course, was that I had not thought about it at all. Since then, though, I've thought about it and prayed about it a very great deal. And I can tell you that I have learned anew and see very clearly that his home must be my own home. One of the men I most admire is John Neihart, the man Black Elk called Flaming Rainbow. Nebraska was his home, and it is his home. And as he is one of my hero guides, it seems to be wise that I make it my home too. At last I have to tell you of a dream or two I dream. I dream, as I have written in my first book, of a time when the Omaha people, the children of the great Chief Blackbird, the people of the stream, as I call them in my book, come back into their own medicine. I dream of the Ponca, the children of Standing Bear, and of the guidance that they give a man that I called Barky Cooper in the second volume of my spiritual autobiography. I dream of their teaching him, healing him, sheltering him through a dark night of the soul. I dream of their home beside the Niobrara. I long to touch that land again and to hear it whisper to me again of what it has seen and what it has known. Even though it has been stained by the pain and scattered blood of those who walk there, even though the shadow of their grief is on that land, because the land is no longer their own. And perhaps most important of all, I dream that it is time for us, the whites, the children of the web spinner people, to make again a holy place of Hill Island and Pahuk. Pahuk was a sacred center of the Pawnee where the animal spirits taught them how to live here in this country, in the valley of the Flatwater River. The animal spirits taught the Pawnee what to do to flourish here. And in time, the Pawnee taught and showed the Omahas. And it was those two tribes who taught the white pioneers and settlers here. It was they who showed us how to build earth lodges in the Great Plains. Dugouts and sadis show the traces of Pawnee teaching. And such dwellings say to those who live in them, the earth is your home. The earth is your shelter. The Pawnee people left the valley of the Flatwater River and the banks of the Loup, the Cedar, the Elkhorn, when we would not protect them nor provide for them. Perhaps they sensed what was truly in the hearts and minds of the whites who had come here. Perhaps our ancestors really wanted them to vanish, to be gone. I do not know if that departure was a sad but inevitable part of human history. Maybe it was. But whether it was destined to be or not, it is time to begin to repair and heal it. Not that we should do this to benefit others or out of some misguided sense of guilt. We have to see that we must do it for ourselves and for our children out of responsibility. So I believe that it is time for us to ask the Pawnee to come home in some way. I believe that is more important than you can possibly imagine, that we do it and that we do it soon. And I dream of being a part of that process. I dream of helping those important things to come true. Of course, I also have my ties with other people. Some of the men and women who work and live here in our time are my friends, and many of them are my loved ones. But I can honestly tell you that it is not those ties which make me a Nebraskan. What has made me a Nebraskan, a child of the Flatwater River, is that I have listened to this land with the ears of my heart and learned to love it. Much that you and I do today will fade from the memory of this hour because it is too small, too temporary, too much a pastime act or thought of the people of our time. Our people are so hasty, so careless, wasteful, in so many ways childlike. But there are things that need to be done and deserve to be done in the valley of the Flatwater River, things that the earth could remember forever. And it is time we set about doing those things, even if it takes us a long time to learn how. It is a very great struggle for us. And so, if you can let yourself see the truth in what I have had to say about these things, perhaps you can now understand why I am a Nebraskan. And if you can learn to love and trust the things that I speak of, the guidance here, the heroes, the dreams, you could become a Nebraskan too. In fact, you could do that no matter where you may live, no matter what your work, no matter your faith, nor the color of your skin, nor your language, nor the heritage of your people. And if you could do that, then I bid you welcome. Welcome to the home of Flaming Rainbow. Welcome to my home. The shadows and the spirit friends await you here. Come and let us teach you what we can. Come and let us help you heal yourself. And together we will heal the earth. I'll tell you what the real link is between my counseling and my writing. I've sat with people on that sun porch on South 68th Avenue that I'd only seen half a dozen times. And suddenly, in the midst of some terribly important personal struggle, somebody trying to deal with the heartbreak, the agonizing pain of having been incestuously assaulted when they were young, or deal with a sudden, violent, unexpected death of a loved one, or of shame, becoming aware of things in their inner life that they never were prepared to understand. And of course, when we see things inside we don't understand, we're very quick to judge. And we're just as idiotic when we judge ourselves as we are when we judge other people. And I sit with them, and suddenly I have the feeling that entire room is full of people. I have the feeling that the whole place is full of people trying to learn the same thing my client is trying to learn, and others there trying to show us how to understand what my client is trying to do right then. So it's as though I'm in the midst of Grand Central Station in some spiritual sense. It's really as though I'm surrounded by people who are trying to, not by people, as they aren't people. They aren't people like we're people. They're not afraid like we are. Not in the same way, anyway. At least not the ones that touch my life. And I ask him to help me. I ask him all the time. Sometimes they say, do it yourself, you know. When these things happen, they don't happen with everybody. But when they do, it's a very mysterious thing. I mean, it's an awesome thing. It's a medicine thing. It's sacred. And it's bigger than my life. And I can feel it when it happens. And I almost always cry, like I'm doing right now. Because I don't know what I ever did to deserve to be a part of anything so fantastic. And so, sometimes that happens in encounters with people, in counseling and therapy, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes it also happens in my writing. Sometimes I will feel or hear things that are like the whispers on the wind. They're soft, but if I do my part right, they're very clear. And sometimes I'll get part of it. I'll get part of a story, but I know it is more important in my writing that everything I say be the spiritual truth than it is that I write something interesting or clever or popular or successful or whatever. And so if I don't know what happens, I have to wait. And I'll pray about it in the front of my mind and in the back of my mind for a while, or listen. And suddenly it's like I will hear something, or I'll dream something, or somebody will come up to me on the street and say something to me, and it's as though what I need to learn is embedded in the words they say. I've had that experience many times. And when it happens, it's as though the volume is turned up, so that a person can be speaking very softly, and yet it's something inside me intensifies how well I hear it or how clear it is, and I know it bears on something that I'm struggling with. In those ways, my writing and my counseling are alike. And sometimes in my teaching it happens too. Although this book, The Boy Who Had an Elephant for a Pet, is really written in a poetic style, there's only one poem in it, but it seems appropriate somehow to read it. It's not very long. It's sort of the dedication to the book. They have called me many things in my own time, and I have seen myself reflected in the eyes of others in the various ways there are to see and to be seen. And past the portals of my waking mind have seen the face shapes and the shadows of a dozen fine identities. I've seen them step out upon my inner stages and show me their hearts and their hands and their purposes. And in the search to learn what it meant and what it could reveal of what I was born into the world to do and be among my people and the other children of our time, I struggled. And the threads of how I would permit myself to see and what I saw are here gathered and make a phantom tapestry. Or maybe I made one. See here then the glimpses and the whisperings that these things witness to. And for those who will see, there is a trail here that I left in the dust and grass across the face of time from my childhood until I was 50. The most important single thing that I know about my work is that The Boy Who Had an Elephant for a Pet, as a book, has two main themes in it. The story proper, The Boy Who Had an Elephant for a Pet, has everything, or almost everything, that I had ever learned about loving until I began it in 1971. I'm wiser about it now than I was then. But what is in it is plenty wise enough for anybody I've ever met. And so that's the main wish in the first part of the book. There are themes in it about who I am and about my life work. But in the first part of the book, I try to show people what I had learned about love and its role in our lives from the time I started to wake up until 1971. In the last part of the book, there's a set of 4 stories about the people that I call the people of the stream, the people who lose their way as a people, as a nation. There's an old saying, without a vision the people perish. It's all about what it feels like to be a tribe that loses its medicine, where it's the medicine path that they should make together with a sense of community of spirit into the future is taken away. What inspired that was a story I'd heard 5 years before I wrote that, about the fact that the last Omaha Indian medicine man had died, and he died before an apprentice was trained. I went to Macy with Carolyn Avey, the gal who was Indian herself, Native American herself, and we talked about that on the way up. And I carried that around inside me for 5 years. And then at the end of one summer, I suddenly knew that I had something to say about it. And the way it comes out is about the people of the stream and what they learned and how it could help the children of the web spinners, the children of the spiders, the people the Omaha call the multitude, the cream-skinned people, whites, our people. So that last part of the book is about what I've heard my spiritual teachers say about how we can find our way as a people in America because of what they learned. So I'm really trying to pay a very great debt to the children of my time and place, not just Nebraska, but all of us in the best way I know how. There's one story I'd like to read. The story is called Her Gift Was Not Her Triumph. Although the child seemed ordinary and natural to most, in fact she was very exceptional, and those of us who could know it knew it early. Later we found out that her gifts and character had qualities that were really beyond our imagination. But perhaps this is often so, and the people among whom the children come simply do not know how to see what the young can do or be. And could it be that we do not really want to see? Or if we permit ourselves to see natural gifts of great power or force or charm, do we know in any way how we could help to develop them? And then, of course, there is always a possibility that we fear what a child could be among us. But there are those among the young who survive our neglect and suppression and carelessness with what is so precious. And she was one who did that. When she came among us, there was a sign that she would be a new beginning for our people in some way, because her eyes were blue, a different color than our own, the color of the waking day sky. And many were the murmurs and surprise and wonder about that among the people. But nothing of importance was known about her, because others merely chatted and guessed aloud about what it might mean. They would not pray about it. Only later did we learn to observe and see what was really natural to her. Perhaps we could have known what would have been possible for her if we had had more care and respect and less idle curiosity. But finally it came clear to us anyway through the events that followed, and that is how it so often is. When there were storms, she sometimes told us when they were coming. And always, if the force of the storm was later great, we could find out that she had mentioned it to someone beforehand. And later it became clear to us that she might have begun to do that even while she was still very young. But she had done so in such a way that we had not yet learned to understand what she meant. But when she learned to speak, she learned to use her speech to tell us how the storm would be and where it would hit and when. It meant that she had ways of knowing things that were very powerful, but we could not see how to use her knowings to help us all. And yet she showed us by knowing this that she was more than we had ever thought she was. And so we knew what we must do, as well as we could see how to do it, to help her grow in her power and gift. And we were not aware then how it would all turn out. But you will see that it was really better that we could not look ahead. We asked an older medicine woman to be her second mother and to help her learn the nature of her gift and of her power. And in time together, they discovered how to best respect that gift and what that gift could fully mean. That was all we really knew about what to do for her, and yet somehow it seemed to have been enough. She learned to tell us how to find lost things, and if someone would come to her and describe an object, she would see in her mind where it was, and even describe what was around it. And she would talk with the hunters and see herself among the game and wildlife for them, and then somehow could draw a way in the sand to show them where the game would be, and they would go, and that's how it would be. It was helpful, and perhaps we even let it make us careless and a little lazy. She could sense the intentions of other people and even of living things, and we relied upon her to warn us so that we could alert our scouts or watchers if someone was nearby who was not one of us. We knew that she somehow dreamed these things or saw these things, but she could not tell us more than that. Hers was a very lonely path, partly because others feared that she could see into their hearts, and in truth, it really was so. And many feared what she would find there if she turned her inner eyes towards them. And the burden of knowing the hearts of men and women was very great and weighed heavily on her, and none of us could share her weariness. She had to learn to protect and maintain herself, and in this, sadly, she became more alone. The burden of knowing brings a great responsibility along with its direct load. But she would not turn her knowing against anyone, even though it would have been so easy to do. She knew somehow that this must not be done, and it was well she did, because we could not have taught her any of this, since none of us had ever had a gift like hers, which should be so respected. So we did not have any way to understand how it could be misused. But she could see that somehow, and even as a young girl, would not use her gift in any dark or selfish way. Our hearts were often sad for her because we would see her at play or laughing and running, and suddenly her laughter would stop, and she would look away and seem to stare, and then soon she would turn and run to her second mother and talk about what she saw. She was always very serious and respectful about her visions. And because of that, she was rarely ever happy and free in a childlike way. As a young woman, when she was old enough and ready to pick a mate, the young men would come and talk to her by the streams or by a trail. Those who were not afraid to be looked into and did not fear her power too much, as she could see in a moment how everything would be with them, how they would live and how they would die. And so, at a time when the young have full freedom of love and curiosity and the excitement in courting, she would see only the whole unfolding of a young man's life, saw visions of good or darkness, wisdom, folly, illness, injury, aging, and death. She saw these as a daily thing. In a sense, she was denied this childhood too. But perhaps it had to be. For how else could she have known who her life partner, for her and for her gifts, should really be? But it burdened her, even though it opened the eyes of her heart to the understanding of human life. Some thought she might turn away from marriage, but her second mother knew that she was supposed to bear a son and daughter, and that the power of her gift would shine through those children among our people and help keep us. And so the price she had to pay had to be paid. She taught some few to understand how to use what she could see in the best ways, and she would not tell anyone what she knew if it would be a useless burden to them. And so she carried the load of lives of her friends and relatives and the rest of us every day, all her life, and did it alone. In this, she earned everyone's respect. And it strengthened her so that in time, she fully understood the meaning and the passage of life. But it wore heavily upon her, and weariness was her true companion. There was little we could do for her in this, but that is how it is. And in time, her heart was made sweet by it and by the tears she used to help to cleanse herself. When she was an old woman, her light shined so bright that even those who had no vision at all could see it clearly. And so it all turned out probably about as well as we could have expected. She married, and her first husband died young, as a warrior sometimes will. And she had seen it. But she took the man in marriage anyway and loved him completely. And this was a proof of her great depth and strength, and showed how very well she had learned how a human ought to bear a spiritual gift, because she loved him anyway. Just as one loves a flower, knowing it will soon fade, but completely, without holding back. Not many of us have the courage to love in such a way. Her second husband was a scout, the most respected and honored among us, and she bore her children by him. And one day saw from far away as he fell dying, long before it happened. And so for her he died and left her 100 times, 1,000 times. And she bore it. And we later said of her that in her hours amongst us, it was not what she was given, but what she carved out of her own heart that was the great triumph for her and for all our people. Because she taught us of the ways of love as much as of the gift of distant sight. And her spirit still walks this land and was always near my people while they were here by the stream. And we often honored her memory. She saw, she understood, she loved nevertheless. And so her gift was not her triumph. The last thing I want to share with you is the thing at the end of the book, The Boy Who Had an Elephant for a Pet and Other Fables, called Medicine Voices. A man may be many things among his companions, but if he is afraid to be all that he can be and realize the power of the gift of self, what good could he possibly be to them? If one permits himself to be afraid of the voices of his larger self, he restricts the strength of spirit that lives in him and could aid him and his people. To harbor such a fear is to disrespect the river of life. When a people permits itself to teach and encourage such a fear in their young, they shape a bitter harvest, and its destiny is small. Our waking understandings of life are too twisted, too weak, and too narrow to be used to guide the lives of a worthy people. This can be seen by anyone who is a searcher or a listener. This is clear for reasons that those in their waking mind cannot really grasp. Perhaps because the heart cannot bear to see the truth of it. But no tribe is ever so complete in its goodness or its wisdom that it really ought to live forever anyway. The same as with persons. And yet it takes great courage and wisdom to see that this must be so. A single man or woman can bring the voice of life to a people, no matter what trail they should walk together or separately. And even though a people stumbles in darkness, a single voice that speaks for the voice of life can bring light to them and help them find their way, or help them learn to find their way. The shared spirit of a people can actually call out to the sleeping selves among them and awaken one or more, so that those who can and will may learn to speak with a medicine voice. It is the medicine voice that speaks for the voice of life in the language of a people, of a time and place. You can learn to hear the medicine voice that speaks to your people, if you will. And perhaps you can learn to lend your own voice to the voice of life, and thus it will speak through you to those around you. These things can actually be done. First, of course, one must waken to the possibility, and then one must do whatever is required to make himself or herself ready. And even those who are not suited to lend their voices can learn to listen with the ears of their hearts. So I ask you to do that at least, if you can see how to do no more. Now the other books, The Triumph of Thomas Wallace, Birth of a Dream Speaker, Stardust in My Closet, they have completely different purposes in that respect than this book does. You know, they're novels, they're inspirational, they reveal things about character, they show people it can be done, because the hardest thing in the world for anybody to learn is that you can be emotionally and spiritually awake, and it doesn't have to kill you. We are surrounded by people who are terrified to touch the absolute spiritual truth of our time. And even our women are afraid. And since they are the voice of the eyes of the heart in every people, their voice is silent, because there's so much pain and loss in what they understand the best and what they love the most, that they cannot bear to feel it. I know this is true, and it's part of our decline as a people. The Cheyenne used to say, the strength of our people is in our women. It doesn't matter the army you send out into the field. Well, that's still true. But our women are silent, because if they touch what is happening in our time, it's unbearable. And so they guard themselves against what you might call the river of spirit, or what the Germans call the Zeitgeist, the spirit of our time. This is an end time, and everybody knows it. They don't know what's going to end. Some of them think it's going to be Armageddon. They think the world is going to end. You know, some of them think our culture is going to end. Some of them think it's going to be atomic war. Rollo May used to say, what has happened is the meanings in the symbols we use as a people no longer have any power or energy. And that is what has ended. I'd be more inclined to say, we can't live anymore trying to live out the dreams of 18th century British and French noblemen who were well-intended about us and wanted us to have what they wanted their children to have. And we've done the things they thought were right. We built schools and let people go to them. But we've found that even the educated, their lives are full of folly. Many of them don't know that there are any other living people in the world besides themselves, or they have a mind and they have no heart. And what good is education if it produces people who have no heart? Tin Men. Right now I'm working on a book. I'm trying to complete a book that's called The Triumph of Thomas Wallace. which is a book that starts in 1832 in the Rocky Mountain West. Actually starts in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming and winds up in Omaha, Nebraska. He comes here in the middle of his life after a long search and a lot of growth and learning. When I finished that, the next book that I've already got this in manuscript form, but we haven't completed the word processing of it. It's a book called Stardust in My Closet, about a guy who grows up in a farm in Iowa and learns when he's about 4 years old to play in a big closet that's built into his room. And he sees the sparkle of things that he thinks are fireflies. You know, he sees fireflies out the window at night. And he sees this sparkly stuff and he starts playing with it and stuff. You know, he's just a kid. But eventually he gets into the habit of going there and sitting there and waiting for it to come. And as he gets better at it, it comes more and more. And the book is about what he learns about life from having stardust in his closet. The ancient Greeks call that Zeus's golden shower. Zeus is the father of the gods, and his golden shower, or golden snow, was his grace, you know. That they said that if you learn to see things properly, you could even see it drifting down, you know, from where he was. So that's Stardust in My Closet is a book I didn't even start till March. I mean, it's funny to, you know, I never wrote anything that fast, and yet I like it. I know it's going to be all right. The other book I'm working on that has to wait until those two are done is called Birth of a Dream Speaker. It's the first book I wrote that's in the 90s. I mean, it's right now. It's about a guy who goes down to a place just near Nebraska City. And there's a place there where there's a flat where a creek runs along, and there's some odd clay there, and there's some sort of a radiance or brightness that shines there sometimes, and then at particular times of the year it gets brighter. And this guy, in the springtime it's the brightest, and this guy goes down there and it's like he sees this shower like a fountain of light. I call it a light fountain, and he walks into it. And in it, he sees a bunch of things that are true about what's happened near there in the past, long ago, and sees into his own heart, and then later steps out. And the story is about what's it like for the guy, what happens to him, and what would it be like, you know, right now in our time, to walk into a light fountain, to be spiritually transformed in some way. And of course, he doesn't become an angel, you know. That's one of the things that my writing, I write about it all the time. I try to show people that I've never seen any evidence that spiritual awakening has like healed me of my imperfections or made me less stupid or careless. I try to be less stupid or careless, but I think it's opened the eyes of my heart. But it's certainly, and it's redeemed my life in a lot of ways. But I'm as flawed as anybody I know. And I think the people who think, you know, if there are people who think that if you're spiritually awake, you must be very religious and you must be very orthodox, you know, and very straight, and you've been saved. You know what I'm trying to say. I don't want to make fun of anybody's faith, but there are people who seem to think that you turn from being an ordinary human person into a silk suit, or you know, into an angel or something. You're transformed in that. That hasn't been my experience at all. So that's what I write about. I try to encourage people to well, let's say to accept themselves, fix what you have to fix, and accept the rest. That's the main thing.